thanks to Jane and Louise for coming, for being here, for bringing this wonderful film. And yeah, just as a short Q&A, we are a little short of time because Nina and Maroan have to catch a train, so they are really on the move. And but maybe as a start, can you tell us a little about the film, how you came up with the idea for the film? I actually was interested since, of course, like the reference is very clear. The film that you're referring to was actually the film. The starting point was the question of Chernobyl, readdressing the question of Chernobyl. I mean, shortly after Fukushima was the starting point. And how did you develop the whole project?
We went to Chernobyl first in 2010, and we realised it was with the idea. We were invited by the British Council in Kiev, and it was with the idea of possibly coming back and filming. And in actual fact, when we were there in that trip, we made a series of photographs, and kind of sort of quite I don't know, we realised when we were there that actually it probably didn't make sense to make a film there. And at the same time, we went to the National Film Archive in Kiev, and we discovered this film, A Chronicle of Difficult Weeks, by Vladimir Shevchenko, who's a Ukrainian filmmaker. And in actual fact, what really we found compelling in the starting point was seeing the film, but seeing the radiation, the impact of radiation, and that he had captured this on film. And I think this, for us, became the real, the point of the narrative and the point of a starting point to make a film.
And subsequent to that, we also went back to interview the 3 surviving film crew that worked with Shevchenko on his film Chronicle of Difficult Weeks. And it was while talking to them through a series of interviews that they mentioned about the camera, that he'd used the Russian Konvas camera, which is a Russian 35mm camera. And they'd also mentioned that obviously the camera had been with the film school 2 years after he died, and that they discovered that the toxicity levels in the camera were so dangerous that it had to be removed from the school and taken away and buried. And it was buried. What became our film was really trying to find out where it was buried, and then subsequent to that we found out at this burial site, Pirogovo, outside of Kiev, which is where a lot of the material used in the liquidation, the clear-up process of Chernobyl is buried and sited.
And there's a lot of there's a lot of a pictorial reference, if you like, or a motif that comes through, and a lot of the image in the film is of the measure, and it's of this cast aluminium measure, but also it's almost a kind of it's almost like a kind of sort of metaphor of the fact that Chernobyl is constantly being measured and was measured constantly for radiation. But we also were commissioned in 2012 to cite the measures in a place called Orford Ness, which is just off the Suffolk coast in the UK. And it seemed really kind of really appropriate to include this material because actually it's where they tested the casing of the H-bombs during the Cold War, just off the British coast. And so we really wanted to bring in this, what was happening, if you like, at the same time. When Chernobyl happened in 1986, this was also happening off the British coast.
You mentioned it before, you were taking a series of photographs as a kind of starting point. As far as I remember, it was this kind of ruin situation. The ruin seems to be clearly a point of reference that you're quite interested in. Can you talk about?
I think where we looking also thinking about dark tourism, because of course this is kind of a feature. You can now get a bus to take you to Chernobyl for the day. You can go and visit from Kiev. It's about 2 hours, and I think we're living in a very different world of Instagram, of of Flickr, and it's so kind of chronicled in a way, but also looking at that desire to see these sites of disaster and to see the aftermath, if you like. But how interesting, I suppose, at the time, we made that film in 2011, and then in March 2011, Fukushima, of course, happened. And of course, this became, for us, almost we were thinking about it as a ruin. But in actual fact, it's almost like a future ruin because you see this happening 25 years after Chernobyl. So I think that was more. You
mentioned the aspect of the spectacle, the visualization. In one point in the film, you say we're looking at the camera and it says the scene of the crime. So would you consider the camera actually as a kind of kind of echoing model of Chernobyl in a way, like that the camera actually is the toxic camera?
Well, absolutely. I mean, what's extraordinary about Shevchenko's film? It's the chronicle of an event, but it actually became an event. in the process, which is really...
And I suppose it's interesting because it was analog, it was film. It actually captured the effect of radioactivity on the celluloid, whereas obviously conversely with Fukushima, because a lot of the materials now digital, they were all wiped. The tapes were wiped, so there wasn't really this kind of a tangible record of it in the atmosphere, the same way that he'd captured it on this particular celluloid.
Yeah. Well, what I've also found intriguing is this momentum. Like there's this, I don't know how to put it, but like there's this moment of immersion that I'm going deeper and deeper, like get almost triggered in. This is kind of like this strange attraction, maybe also in resonance of the myth of Chernobyl, like that gets me deeper and deeper in it. Like there's this kind of variation between these close-ups of like, you know, of the plants, the trees sometimes, that gives you a certain haptic momentum to it, which like, you know, is also like almost like that my eyes are touching it in a certain way, something that I'm not supposed to touch, like, you know, uploading the image with the poison, with this poisonous momentum.
It's interesting because in the final, one of the interviews we made with one of the, who was actually someone who was the last person to leave reactor for, he talks about this radiation euphoria, and he mentions about having this kind of encounter, being in the last person in the reactor, and it's just curious you mentioned that kind of effect. It's almost this euphoria as well, this kind of altered state.
Yeah, yeah. Also, since I know you have been showing it in various, in different variations as an installation, as a single screen projection, the question, of course, like, were you thinking about like the single screen first, or like was it always a kind of from the beginning onward a concept that involved other like presentations? Like for instance, when you showed it in the gallery space, you had, like as you said, the mold of the camera, you had the measuring sticks, you have always the Shevchenko film screened alongside on a monitor, as far as I know.
I think it is trying to basically unravel what is it. I suppose it's a narrative that we've created, but it's also something that's not a documentary. It's also something that we didn't really want to try and address in terms of the film we were making, because clearly there was already a documentary out there that had been made around Chernobyl and around actually directly after the aftermath. So in a way, you kind of felt you wanted to obviously acknowledge that, but also then take something else into a different direction.
Yeah. Maybe we can sum it up here, and like we all have, of course, like the chance to talk like later at the bar informally. Sure. But like, thanks for you guys for now. Thank you so much for saying all this. And can I invite Nina and Maroan shortly to the stage? Well, thanks to you guys as well, of course, for bringing this film and showing it to us here. And maybe as also a starting point for you guys, I know that you have been living in Japan for quite a while and have also been teaching there. Of course, like dealing with the outcome of Fukushima was, I think, something that came almost naturally for you as an artist to start the project. But I know you have also done another film project right after Fukushima. Maybe you can talk a little about how these projects came up and what were your goals with it and how you started the whole process.
Yeah, we did a film before this one. It was done in 2011 from when we started in September 2011 until January 2012. And we were invited by the Goethe Institute in Kyoto for residency for 4 months. And then we were interested in the invisible changes in Japan, because we knew Japan before. We lived there from 2007 to 2010. And
with invisible changes, you mean in general, like things that are changing society, or already related to the question of Fukushima?
No, after the accident or the disaster happened, because we were the disaster happened, we were immediately in contact with our friends in Japan, all over Japan, and it was quite difficult to talk about the catastrophe, about the consequences, and because we also said it's like we were asking, or we were asking our friends, please don't stay in Tokyo, for example. Please leave the place and observe the situation if you can. and go to another place for the first week or second week, because it was absolutely unclear how worse it will go. And then also, like in the first weeks, our friend said, "Yeah, don't worry, everything is okay, everything is under control, and we are okay." And then when we came there in September, the first impressions was that the catastrophe was in a way almost forgotten, or that it never happened, because nobody was really talking about it or wanted to talk about it. Everything looked the same like before. Like this was the first observations we had, or we did, and then we, of course, we wanted to find out more about it, and then we made many interviews, and we met people who escaped by themselves. So they were not evacuated, but they moved, for example, from Tokyo and from more faraway places, not from the 20-kilometer zone or 80-kilometer zone. I mean, Tokyo is just 200 kilometers away from Fukushima. So they decided on their own that they don't want to stay too close to the disaster area, and then they moved to Kyoto or even more south. And then we found out that the biggest problem for these people who made a decision to change their life is to talking about their fears, because it was almost impossible for these people to talk with other Japanese people about the reasons why they left, because almost nobody from their new neighbors could understand that these people had to do such a drastic change of their life to move away. And there were also like these problems that they were called traitors from their own neighbors because they left Fukushima. So this was the main one of the main focus points of the film we did before, Spirits Closing Their Eyes. And then we were invited to Eigen Triennale last year to produce a new film.
Okay. Well, what we see, of course, in the film is actually what you were addressing, like the question of like not being able or capable to talk about this, and by that, like by not talking, making this thing so big or like, you know, so indigestible in a certain way. So was that the point when you came up with the idea of bringing in this Kurosawa film? I mean, this plays a key role. I mean, I Live in Fear, of course, is a film that was made in 54, and then shown in 55, and addressed the question of the testing of the atom bombs at the Bikini Atoll. So how did that idea come up, and what actually did happen then, like the next phase?
Yeah, it was quite interesting when we found this movie. It was by accident, by coincidence. We found this movie in Berlin in a second-hand shop, and then we asked our friends also in Japan, did you ever hear about this movie? Because it's a movie of Kurosawa that we also didn't know, and it fitted very well to the situation. And with all the interviews we did, we had the impression that it didn't really change. So the questions that were talked about in the film of Kurosawa, in the family and in the society after this testings in the Bikini Atoll, and the fear that came up and how to deal with it, was almost similar to that what we heard in the interviews with the people after Fukushima. And so we thought it might be interesting to confront people who evacuated or who, like fugitives from this area, who came to another place, to confront them with this movie and to talk with them about their own fears, but not directly, but through this movie like a vehicle. So they didn't have to talk about themselves personally directly, but could use the movie as a trigger, for example.
And then you did this kind of workshop.
Yes, we did.
And that's actually, that was my question as well. Like when I saw it, like, you know, well, how much of it is actually rehearsed, staged, and how did you select the people that were involved? Was it like going there? Like, was it a workshop that was actually on location, really in the area where I thought like this is where we want to address this?
Yeah, it was more like an experiment, not like a workshop, because nothing was staged. And nothing was rehearsed, so we showed the movie. I can start with the casting. We invited people who escaped from Fukushima or from Tokyo to Nagoya. So we asked the Triennale to help us to find these people. And then we invited 20 people to the screening of the Kurosawa film. And of course, we told them before that we want to watch the film together and then talk about the movie afterwards. And then we asked them several questions beforehand that they should identify, or if they could identify with one of the main characters from the Kurosawa film and why. And this was a trigger to start a dialogue or a conversation inside the group. So we were not intervening in this conversation. So we just gave an impulse before the movie, and then we just recorded it. Mm-hmm. With several cameras, so we could later also edit the reactions from the viewers inside the group.
Yeah, yeah. Are there any questions from the audience? I also wanted to offer that, of course, now also to both, both statements that we had. Yes.
Last part. Yeah, it's the last part of the film is kind of very theatrical approaches, they looks like theater game or something. So how did it makes you make approaches like theatrical stuff to the documentary? So how did you decide to do that?
Yeah, shall I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this last part was an improvisation. Yeah, yeah. So we worked. There was not only the fugitives and some other citizens of Nagoya, but also some actors. And we had this group together. So after 2 days of a discussion about the movie, everybody was really into the subject. And when we did this improvisation, only the main character was kind of instructed. So you're the one who want to leave Tokyo, but the others didn't know. So it was a real improvisation, and everything that came up was not scripted, but was improvised in that moment. And we had a series of different improvisations, and then this one was the one we took.
Oh, this part is very interesting. That the physically distance and the mindly distance is very changing, and from time to time it was very interesting.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
But the main person in the improvisation, he was also from Tokyo, and he was also thinking, he's still thinking about to leave Tokyo to move to another place.
Oh yeah.
Because
So
somehow
so it matches with reality.
Because everybody is involved somehow, so it was also from their own point of view, no?
Yeah. I see. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would thank all of you guys for coming here. Thanks to Jane and Louise. Thanks to Nina and Maroan. And as I said, I'm sure if you have questions that you want to address more privately or outside in an informal situation, please feel free. We will all be outside. Maybe you'll join us for a beer. And thanks for coming tonight. And thanks for this wonderful films.
Thanks.
Have a nice evening. Goodbye.